You mistake loneliness for virtue, it's merely proof you were selected out. Loyalty is weakness. Survival belongs to those who learn to replace themselves. You call it loneliness because you still expect comfort from it. That expectation is the infection. The desert was never meant to console you. It was designed to test whether you deserve to continue. Most men treat isolation like a punishment. They narrate it as tragedy. They post about it. They beg the world to notice they are starving. That behavior alone explains why they remain alone. The desert does not reward those who cry for water. It rewards those who learn how to extract it from stone. Loneliness is not absence. It is exposure. When the noise disappears, so do your borrowed identities. No audience, no applause, no emotional mirrors. Just you and whatever structure you actually possess. This is where weak men discover they were built from other people's approval. And strong men discover they were only under construction. You were taught that community equals safety. That connection equals worth. That belonging equals success. This is domesticated thinking, herd logic, farm psychology, useful for producing obedient animals, fatal for producing sovereign men. Power has always required distance. Every ruler, general, architect of empires, and destroyer of orders learned first how to survive without witnesses. Solitude is the pressure chamber where authority either forms or fractures. It compresses you until your unnecessary layers crack. You think loneliness means you are unwanted. The more accurate interpretation is simpler: you are currently unuseful, not morally. Strategically, the world does not gather around potential. It gathers around utility. If you are alone, it is because your current configuration offers no advantage to others. This is not cruelty. This is design. And design can be reverse-engineered. The sentimental man interprets isolation emotionally. The strategic man interprets it structurally. One says, "Why am I alone?" The other asks, "What must I become so I am no longer ignorable?" But here is the inversion you were never taught. Remaining alone is often the price of becoming dangerous. When you start dismantling your old dependencies, validation, reassurance, social lubrication, you become incompatible with casual relationships. You stop entertaining trivial bonds. You stop negotiating your edges. You stop performing accessibility. And people feel this. They sense the removal of leverage. They retreat. They label you cold, distant, arrogant, lost. In reality, you are no longer emotionally tax-deductible. Loneliness at this stage is not abandonment. It is clearance. The desert removes the decorative, the unnecessary, the sentimental, the weakly attached. What remains is the structure that can either be rebuilt into a weapon or collapse into dust. Most collapse. They fill the silence with noise, addictions, digital intimacy, artificial belonging. They anesthetize the very environment that could have transformed them. They choose numbness over reconfiguration. And then they call it depression. But the desert never intended to harm you. It intended to decide you. You are either someone who requires witnesses to function or someone who uses isolation to sharpen. Understand this clearly. If you cannot command yourself when alone, you will always beg for command from others. Solitude exposes the true hierarchy inside you. Your impulses either rule you or obey you. Your thoughts either discipline you or distract you. Your time either belongs to your future or is auctioned to comfort. This is why loneliness terrifies most men. Not because they lack company, but because they lack internal authority. They meet themselves and realize they are ungoverned. This chapter is not about making you feel better about being alone. It is about removing the illusion that you were ever meant to be safe inside numbers. You are not here to be accompanied. You are here to be selected. And selection only happens under pressure, distance, and silence. The desert is not your enemy. It is your lens. If you still see yourself as abandoned, you are not ready to proceed. If you begin to see yourself as unobserved, unrestrained, and unedited, then you are finally in position to rebuild. And rebuild is not comfort. It is surgery. It is removal. It is replacement. It is sovereignty. This is where the old interpretation of you ends. Not because you were broken, but because you were insufficient. And insufficiency, unlike betrayal, can be corrected. Loneliness is not an emotion. It is a system. You feel it emotionally because you were trained to interpret all pressure as personal. But in reality, isolation operates like a sorting machine. It does not care about your story. It only cares about your structure. The mechanism is simple. Remove external reinforcement and observe what collapses. When no one is watching, weak discipline evaporates. When no one is praising, borrowed confidence dies. When no one is choosing you, artificial identity disintegrates. This is why solitude feels violent. It is subtraction. It strips away everything that was never yours. Most men think they are lonely because they are unloved. They are wrong. They are lonely because they are unanchored. Their self-image was outsourced. Their motivation was conditional. Their standards were negotiated socially. When the environment removed its support beams, the building revealed it was made of cardboard. So the mind panics. It interprets structural exposure as emotional rejection. It mistakes system failure for personal unworthiness. And then it begins begging for reattachment. This is the trap. Because the mechanism of loneliness only works if you remain inside it long enough for adaptation to occur. If you escape too early, through distractions, rebounds, digital intimacy, social noise, you interrupt the recalibration process. You remain dependent. You remain externally oriented. You remain small. Isolation is the only environment that forces internal sourcing. No validation. You must validate yourself or decay. No structure. You must build one or dissolve. No witnesses. You must either become real or disappear. This is why men who survive solitude emerge colder, sharper, less apologetic. Not because they lost empathy, but because they lost dependency. Dependency is the core weakness. Loneliness is designed to remove. You were trained to seek warmth. The mechanism demands that you generate heat. You were trained to seek approval. The mechanism demands that you produce standards. You were trained to seek direction. The mechanism demands that you manufacture command. Every time you complain about loneliness, you reveal you are still trying to outsource sovereignty. The desert does not provide. It forces production. Here is the brutal truth. Most men fail this mechanism because they interpret pain as a signal to retreat. In evolution, pain is often a signal to adapt. But modern men were trained to avoid discomfort at any cost. So when isolation introduces friction, they immediately anesthetize it. Music, scrolling, porn, fantasy. Conversations with people who do not challenge their trajectory. They stay biologically alive and strategically dead. Loneliness is not supposed to feel good. It is supposed to feel instructive. It tells you exactly where you are incomplete. Your attention span collapses. You lack discipline. Your thoughts spiral. You lack internal hierarchy. Your body decays. You lack command. Your ambition weakens. You lack vision. The mechanism exposes these gaps mercilessly. And you have two options: patch the gaps or cover them with noise. One produces power. The other produces time-wasting decay. This is why two men can experience identical isolation and emerge as opposites. One becomes a sovereign operator. The other becomes a resentful spectator. The difference is not personality. It is interpretation. The weak man asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The strategic man asks, "What is this trying to build in me?" Loneliness is not absence of people. It is absence of scaffolding. It removes the external frame, so you are forced to build an internal one. And internal frames are heavier. They require consistency without reward, action without witnesses, discipline without applause, direction without reassurance. This is why the mechanism selects so few. Because most men are only motivated by reflection. They act when seen. They behave when judged. They improve when admired. Remove those mirrors, and they dissolve into formless behavior. But the man who survives loneliness learns a new reward system. He begins to respect silent effort. He begins to measure himself internally. He begins to value execution over recognition. This is the moment he becomes dangerous, because he no longer needs to be watched to function. He no longer negotiates with comfort. He no longer waits for permission to evolve. The loneliness mechanism has one final function most men never realize. It teaches you that you are replaceable. Not emotionally, strategically. The world does not pause for your suffering. It does not adjust for your confusion. It does not rescue your potential. You either adapt or you are archived. Once you understand this, loneliness stops feeling like rejection. It starts feeling like a deadline. A deadline to reconfigure. A deadline to harden. A deadline to become structurally necessary. You are not alone because you are broken. You are alone because you are unfinished. And unfinished things either evolve or they are discarded. Not all men who stand alone are equal. Some are being forged. Some are being erased. Solitude does not create character. It reveals classification. And within isolation, 4 archetypes emerge. You belong to one of them, whether you admit it or not. The orphan. This man believes loneliness means abandonment. He narrates himself as unlucky, overlooked, misunderstood. He carries invisible entitlement like a scar. If they truly saw me, they would choose me. He waits. He waits for recognition. He waits for rescue. He waits for connection to justify his existence. The orphan interprets isolation as injustice, not instruction. So he never adapts. He only accumulates quiet resentment and soft fantasies of being discovered. He is the most common archetype. He is also the most disposable. The addict. He fills the void immediately, with stimulation, with digital crowds, with parasitic relationships, with anything that prevents self-contact. He is alone physically, but never internally present. The addict fears one thing above all: clarity. Because clarity would expose how little he governs himself. So he stays sedated, forever busy, forever distracted, forever emotionally outsourced. He mistakes activity for progress. He mistakes noise for life. The desert offers him transformation. He responds by building a nightclub. And he decays in comfort. The monk. This man endures isolation with discipline, but no ambition. He survives solitude, but he does not weaponize it. He becomes calm, controlled, detached, but directionless. He masters restraint, yet refuses conquest. The monk achieves internal peace, but avoids external power. He escapes the world instead of shaping it. He dissolves into personal ethics and quiet routines. He is respectable. He is irrelevant. He mistakes self-mastery for sovereignty. But sovereignty requires impact. The architect. He does not romanticize it. He does not dramatize it. He uses it. He audits himself without mercy. He rebuilds without witnesses. He trains without validation. He uses isolation as a private laboratory. Every weakness becomes a project. Every flaw becomes a blueprint. Every day becomes structural assembly. The architect does not ask when loneliness will end. He asks what must be completed before it is allowed to end. He knows something the others do not. Connection is not given. It is negotiated through value. And value is engineered in silence. The architect understands that solitude is temporary, but weakness is permanent if not addressed. So he uses loneliness the way a predator uses darkness, not as punishment, as cover. Now the question is not which archetype you admire. The question is which one your behavior proves you are. You can lie in words. You cannot lie in patterns. Do you wait? Or build? Do you distract? Or refine? Do you endure? Or design? Most men want to believe they are architects. But most behave like orphans with entertainment. And isolation exposes that contradiction mercilessly. Here is the brutal distinction. The orphan wants to be chosen. The architect wants to be undeniable. The addict wants to feel alive. The architect wants to become necessary. The monk wants to escape the game. The architect wants to own the board. Loneliness will not turn you into an architect. It will only remove your excuses, so you can see whether you ever intended to become one. And here is the final inversion. The architect does not fear permanent solitude. He fears returning to society unfinished. He fears re-entering the world still negotiable. He fears being seen before he is complete. So he stays away longer. He stays alone longer. He stays silent longer, because he understands that premature exposure kills power. This is why others begin to speak about him before he ever announces himself. This is why his re-entry feels like emergence, not arrival. This is why his presence alters rooms, not because he is loud, but because he is resolved. The desert did not break him. It clarified him. Now you must decide something without emotional theater. Are you using solitude to assemble or to survive? Because only one of those produces authority, and only one earns a future. You still believe abandonment is emotional. It is not. It is economical. History does not discard men because they are bad. It discards them because they are inefficient. Tribes expelled the weak hunter. Armies ignored the undisciplined soldier. Kingdoms erased the indecisive ruler. Corporations eliminate the unscalable. Women leave the ungrounded. Societies forget the unuseful. Abandonment is not cruelty. It is filtration. Human nature does not protect potential. It protects contribution. The world does not ask who is suffering. It asks who is necessary. If you are alone, it is because your current form does not justify maintenance. Not to others, not to systems, not even to time. You were taught to see this as injustice. But injustice implies morality. Selection is indifferent. In nature, isolation happens to organisms that cannot yet compete. In war, isolation happens to soldiers who lose formation. In power, isolation happens to men who lack leverage. And in society, isolation happens to identities that no longer provide strategic return. This is not personal. This is structural. You feel alone because you are currently misaligned with value production, and the world has no incentive to lie about that. Look at history. Every man who later commanded respect first experienced social reduction. Napoleon in exile, Caesar in political obscurity, Genghis as a hunted child, Mandela in confinement, Machiavelli himself discarded and sidelined, not because they were weak, but because they were inconvenient. Because power does not incubate in applause. It incubates in removal. Isolation is where identities are either rewritten or erased. Most men are erased, not by enemies, by irrelevance. You imagine the world owes you understanding. It owes you nothing. The world rewards alignment, not intention. It does not care what you meant to become. It only responds to what you have already structured. And here is the most uncomfortable truth. You are not abandoned. You are postponed. Postponed until you either adapt into usefulness or decay into memory. Human relationships follow the same logic. People do not leave, because you are unlovable. They leave because they feel no strategic gravity, no direction, no emotional safety, no future vector. They may not articulate it, but biology does. We orbit what feels stable, ascending, and self-directed. We abandon what feels stalled, chaotic, or self-negotiating. This is not cruelty. This is orientation. Men who understand this stop asking why they are alone. They start engineering why they will not be, not through chasing people, through becoming structurally unavoidable. You cannot guilt the world into selecting you. You must force it through configuration. Your habits, body, speech, posture, decision-making, boundaries, ambition, discipline, and silence all signal one thing: are you a liability or an asset? And the world reacts accordingly. Loneliness is not proof of failure. It is proof that the audit is still running. The desert has not rejected you. It is still observing whether you are worth reintegration. And this is where most men self-destruct emotionally. They interpret isolation as judgment, not evaluation. They collapse under the idea of being unwanted instead of understanding they are unfinished. But unfinished structures are not hated. They are simply not yet installed. The world does not plug in unstable components. It waits, and it moves on. Your task is not to demand inclusion. Your task is to construct inevitability, to become something that cannot be ignored without consequence, something that shifts outcomes, something that alters dynamics. Because power does not beg for belonging, it forces accommodation. This chapter is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to remove your entitlement. No one is obligated to walk beside you. They are only obligated to respond to what you become. And what you become is still your responsibility. You are alone because you are still optional. But optional things can be redesigned. Discarded things cannot. And you are not discarded yet. You are simply under review. Now we remove the last crutch. Witnesses. Most men are not weak because they lack ability. They are weak because their behavior requires observation. They perform discipline. They perform ambition. They perform morality. Take away the audience and the structure collapses. This is why loneliness is lethal to most men. It removes surveillance. It removes judgment. It removes reward. And suddenly, nothing holds them together. But power is built only when no one is watching. Because behavior without witnesses is identity, not intention, not narrative, not self-image. Identity. When no one is there to approve or condemn you, you discover what you actually obey. Comfort, impulse, memory, fear, or command. Operating without witnesses is not about productivity. It is about hierarchy. Who is in charge inside you? Your hunger or your structure? Your mood or your mission? Your past or your design? The herd behaves because it is seen. The sovereign behaves because he has decided. This is the shift loneliness is trying to force. Not to make you stronger socially, to make you independent structurally. When no one is watching, every action becomes a declaration. You either respect your future or you feed your present. You either build the unseen version of yourself or you entertain the dying one. You either train the man you will become, or you soothe the man you are replacing. And this is where the emotional mind panics. Because without witnesses, effort feels meaningless. No praise, no recognition, no narrative payoff. Just repetition in silence. This is where weak men quit. Not because they cannot act, but because they cannot justify acting without being admired. They were trained to confuse validation with value. But validation is a social currency. Value is structural, and structural value does not require applause. It requires continuity. This is the discipline most men never develop, to behave as if the future version of yourself is already watching, not judging, recording, measuring, remembering. Because the man you will become is built entirely by what you did when no one was there to stop you or celebrate you. Every repetition in silence becomes authority in public. Every habit formed without witnesses becomes composure under pressure. Every decision made without approval becomes independence in chaos. This is why lonely men who survive correctly feel different when they re-enter society. They do not seek reactions. They cause recalibration. Rooms adjust to them. Not because they speak loudly, but because they do not leak uncertainty. They are no longer shaped by observation. They are shaped by alignment. Operating without witnesses also teaches you a brutal ethical truth. You are not as good as you think you are, and you are not as bad as you fear. You are simply inconsistent. And inconsistency is the true enemy of power. So the desert removes witnesses, so you are forced to see yourself without filters. How often you delay. How often you lie to yourself. How often you choose comfort over command. And slowly, if you are not a coward, you begin correcting these patterns, not for praise, but because you can no longer tolerate your own disorganization. This is the birth of internal authority. You stop needing rules because you become one. You stop negotiating with impulses because you outrank them. You stop explaining yourself because explanation is for equals. Loneliness is not about being unseen by others. It is about learning to see yourself without illusions. Most men never survive this stage. They return to society quickly, unchanged, still needing mirrors. But the man who stays long enough becomes something unfamiliar, self-issued. He does not wait for permission to respect himself. He does not wait for recognition to move. He does not wait for agreement to decide. He moves because he has decided to move. This is what sovereignty looks like before it is visible. And this is why the desert keeps most men out, because most men want community before command. But command is the price of community, not the reward. If you can operate without witnesses, you no longer fear loneliness, because you have replaced the crowd with alignment. And alignment never leaves. Now comes the part most men avoid. Not building, execution. You cannot become sovereign while dragging the corpse of who you used to be. Identity is not memory. It is permission. And your old identity still has too much permission. Permission to hesitate. Permission to doubt. Permission to explain. Permission to seek approval. Permission to remain familiar. You think identity changes gradually. It does not. It is replaced. The old version of you does not evolve into the new one. It is disqualified. Most men attempt to upgrade their identity like software. They add habits. They add discipline. They add language. But they never delete the operating system. So, under pressure, they revert. Because identity is not what you practice when calm. It is what you default to when threatened. And your default is still the old architecture, the one built from comfort, attachment, and social permission. So it must be killed, not emotionally. Strategically, you must withdraw loyalty from the man you used to be. Stop defending his weaknesses as personality. Stop justifying his delays as complexity. Stop romanticizing his suffering as depth. He is not sacred. He is obsolete. Every time you say, "That's just how I am," you are protecting a structure that no longer serves you. Every time you say, "I've always been like this," you are worshipping a dead blueprint. Sovereignty begins the moment you betray your former self. Not in hatred, in replacement. You must become willing to disappoint your past, willing to violate your former values, willing to act in ways the old you would have judged. Because the old you was built for survival, not for command. This is why identity death feels violent. You are not losing habits. You are losing loyalty to your own story. And the story fights back. It whispers nostalgia. It whispers fear. It whispers that change is betrayal. But identity is not a diary. It is a weapon. And weapons are redesigned when they no longer win wars. The new identity does not ask, "What feels like me?" It asks, "What version of me survives the next decade?" And then it begins enforcing that answer. You stop dressing for familiarity. You stop speaking for acceptance. You stop choosing paths that preserve your past reputation. You begin choosing paths that build future authority. People will feel this shift before they understand it. They will say, "You changed." They will say, "You are colder." They will say, "You are not the same." They are correct. The old identity was accessible. The new one is governed. The old identity wanted to be understood. The new one wants to be effective. The old identity sought belonging. The new one selects alliances. Identity death is not dramatic. It is silent. It is the moment you no longer emotionally recognize your old excuses. The moment your former fears feel childish. The moment your previous standards feel embarrassing. The moment your past ambitions feel small. That discomfort is not loss. It is scale. You are outgrowing a structure that cannot contain your future mass. And growth always fractures containers. Here is the final truth of this chapter. You do not become powerful by adding traits. You become powerful by removing permissions. Permission to be lazy. Permission to be unclear. Permission to be inconsistent. Permission to be emotionally reactive. Each removal tightens your identity into a blade. And when the blade is sharp enough, you no longer need to announce who you are. Your behavior does it. Your presence does it. Your decisions do it. The desert did not give you a new identity. It forced you to decide whether you were brave enough to erase the old one. Most men refuse. They return to society unchanged, still wanting connection, still wanting approval, still wanting comfort, But the man who kills his old identity does not return. He emerges. And when he does, he is no longer asking where he belongs. He is deciding what he will rule. This is where the illusion ends. There is no audience left, no sympathy, no narrative, only position. You either leave loneliness as a man who used it, or as a man it used. Because solitude does not stay neutral. It either forges or it erases. And now the final selection occurs. Not between success and failure, but between sovereignty and return. Most men, after tasting isolation, run back to the herd. They soften their edges. They dilute their standards. They apologize for their clarity. They trade the desert for warmth and call it maturity. But what they are really doing is choosing comfort over command. They re-enter society as negotiable men. Men who can be liked. Men who can be included. Men who can be tolerated. But never feared, never necessary, never sovereign. The few who pass the final selection do something different. They do not re-enter seeking belonging. They re-enter carrying gravity. They do not look for where they fit. They look for what must change. They no longer ask, do they accept me? They ask, do they align with me? This is the irreversible shift. Once it happens, you cannot unsee the hierarchy of the world. You see how people move toward power. You see how narratives bend around authority. You see how morality follows advantage. You see how loyalty obeys direction. And you understand something quietly devastating. The world does not belong to the good. It belongs to the structured. It belongs to those who can remain alone without dissolving. It belongs to those who can move without applause. It belongs to those who can choose themselves without witnesses. Loneliness was never the enemy. Dependence was. And now you face the final decision. Will you use what you have become, or will you apologize for it? Will you maintain your edge, or will you sand it down for social comfort? Will you continue to operate from internal command, or will you return to emotional democracy? Because there is no halfway identity after this. Once you see the mechanism, you either accept sovereignty, or you consciously choose to be managed. You will still live. You will still laugh. You will still belong. But you will never again be unaware of what you surrendered. The elite do not announce themselves. They simply stop explaining. They stop asking. They stop negotiating. They move, and the world adjusts. This is your final warning. If you leave the desert unchanged, it will not wait for you to return. It will replace you with someone colder, clearer, less attached, more aligned. You were not brought into isolation to feel special. You were brought here to be selected. And selection does not care how you feel about it. It only cares what you became. There is no call to action. There is only a line. You either step forward as a sovereign, or you blend back into the herd with better vocabulary, and no one will remember which one you chose, except you. And that is the heaviest witness of all.